Welcome to Law Day USA. That's May 1st of 2020 this year. My name is Cole Mayer and I am a district judge in Clark and Madison counties. We're really excited to have you joining us for this year's program. Albeit an untraditional one, we're going to talk about some of the most traditional fundamental things in our society. This is our 59th year of celebrating an official Law Day. President Eisenhower introduced the idea some number of years ago, and the U.S. Congress actually adopted it as a national day of celebration 59 years ago. And so again, we'll be celebrating Law Day USA, which celebrates ideas of equality, celebrates the role of our justice system, and the important role of law in a democratic society. Specifically this year, the theme is related to the 100th anniversary of our 19th Amendment. And as I'm sure you all know, the 19th Amendment prohibits the state governments and federal government from denying anyone the right to vote based on their sex. And although we're celebrating the 100th anniversary, that has been a much longer fight than 100 years. In 1878, the first bill to allow women to vote was introduced to Congress. And it took another 41 years before Congress passed that. So in 1919, the 19th Amendment was passed by Congress and was sent to the states for ratification. You will be happy to know that the Commonwealth of Kentucky was the 23rd state to ratify that. Kentucky did that on January 6th of 1920. And on August 26th of 1920, that was actually codified and made into law. And so while we're talking about dates that occurred in 1920, and this is 2020, it sounds like it's years and years and years ago, I'll ask you to think about the fact that this is more like generations ago. When I was 18 and getting ready to vote for the first time, I sat down with my great-grandmother and she told me that she could remember when women didn't have the opportunity to vote. And so for her entire life, whenever she was eligible in elections, she made a special effort to be there, no matter what ailed her, no matter what family commitments she had or work commitments. She never missed an opportunity to vote because she considered it sacred and fundamental in our society. And so please think about the fact that this is a privilege and a right. It's something you should exercise thoughtfully and cautiously. And remember, it was only generations ago that family members that you know or that you may have known didn't have the ability to do that. So please enjoy some of the other presentations here today. Thank you for joining us. Happy Law Day.
Hi, I'm Nancy House, and I'm an attorney here in Winchester at White, McCann & Stewart. I practice mostly family law, but I do a little bit of everything. Here in Kentucky, we don't have specialties, so any lawyer can do just about anything if they really want to. I'm so happy to be able to talk to you guys a little bit about the 19th Amendment and some women, some suffragettes who were particularly important in the 19th Amendment and its ratification by the state of Kentucky. All of the women that I'm going to talk to you about today have some connection to the state of Kentucky, and so I thought that was very important. Let's start with one that you may have heard of, Mary Barr Clay. Mary Barr Clay was obviously a leader in the American women's suffrage movement. She was the elder daughter of Cassius Clay, who you may have heard of. She was born in Lexington, Kentucky in 1839. In 1879, Mary Clay went to St. Louis, Missouri to attend the 10th anniversary of the National Women's Suffrage Association. She then became a Kentucky delegate for that organization, serving as vice president. She was already a vice president for the American Women's Suffrage Association. There she met Susan B. Anthony and arranged for the suffrage leader, Susan B. Anthony, to speak in Richmond, Kentucky. Returning home to Kentucky, she organized the Fayette County Equal Suffrage Association in 1879. The next year, she created the Madison County Equal Rights Association in Richmond, Kentucky. While living in Ann Arbor, Michigan, to educate her two younger sons, she organized a suffrage club there. She became president pro tem of the convention in Flint for the Michigan State Suffrage Association. She also edited a column in the Ann Arbor Register and spoke before the senior law class of the University of Michigan on the constitutional right of women to vote. She submitted the Kentucky Report in Volume 3 of the History of Women's Suffrage, 1876 to 1885. Clay became the first Kentuckian to hold the office of president in a national women's organization when she was elected president of the American Women's Suffrage Association in 1883. She was also the first Kentucky woman to speak publicly on women's rights. So, if you're a female, if you're anyone, you owe a lot to this lady. She really helped bring us where we are today. Another lady that I was not as familiar with, that I looked into for today, is Nannie Helen Burroughs. Nannie Helen Burroughs was an African American educator, orator, religious leader, civil rights activist, feminist and businesswoman. She was born in 1879. Her speech, How the Sisters Are Hindered from Helping, at the 1900 National Baptist Convention in Virginia, won her fame and recognition. And I actually read the speech, or what you can find of it, and it was really, everyone should go read it. It was wonderful to read the whole thing. I would suggest you look that up and read it. It was really something to read. It was great. In 1909, she founded the National Training School for Women and Girls in Washington, D.C. Her objective was at the point of intersection between race and gender. She fought both for equal rights in races, as well as furthered opportunities for women beyond the simple duties of domestic housework. She was born in Orange, Virginia. She and her mother relocated to D.C. And stayed there with her aunt and older sister. In D.C., there were better opportunities for employment and education. She attended M Street High School while she was there, and while she was there, she organized the Harriet Beecher Stowe Literary Society and studied business and domestic science. There, she met her role models, Anna J. Cooper and Mary Church Terrell, who were active in the suffrage movement and in civil rights. From 1898 to 1909, she was employed in Louisville, Kentucky, and there's her Kentucky connection, as an editorial secretary and bookkeeper of the Foreign Mission Board and National Baptist Convention. In her time in Louisville, the Women's Industrial Club had formed, and there they held domestic science and management courses. One of the founders of the Women's Convention was Nannie Burroughs, providing additional help to the National Baptist Convention and serving from 1900 to 1947 for nearly half a century. She was president for 13 years in the Women's Convention. She was involved in so many things. She was involved in the NACW. Because of her contribution to the NACW, the National Association of Wage Earners was founded to draw the public's attention to the dilemma of African American women. She was president, and there were other very well-known activists at that time who were involved as well. She was involved in lots of other organizations that really helped to advance gender equality and equality between the races. She was part of the NAACP. By 1928, she was appointed committee chairwoman by the administration of Herbert Hoover. So she continued her work throughout her entire life for equalization of women and between the races. She, again, is someone that if you've never heard of her, you should definitely read about her, because it's fascinating, what people could do then, what women could do then, over 100 years ago. So just imagine what we can do now. And the last lady that I read about also has a Kentucky connection. She was born in Louisville, Kentucky. Her name was Virginia Penny. She was a social reformer and economist. And she was an early leader of the American women's suffrage movement. And then she became more involved in labor union organization and running her own employment agency for women. So this is a lady who was born in 1826, long before the 19th Amendment. And she's an economist, and she's trying to figure out, how women can help themselves that long ago. Again, she was born in Louisville, Kentucky. She lived in New York City from 1859 to 1861 to finalize her research about the economy and how women and where women can work. And again, she published several books. The first publication of what jobs were open to women and what wages they might earn. She used a systematic research method to interview thousands of employers and workers. She interviewed hundreds and thousands of people in person, had lots of mail-in survey questionnaires, and she had hundreds of listings in her first version of her book, listings for different employment. And the first version of her book was titled How Women Can Make Money, Married or Single, in all branches of the arts and sciences, professions, trades, agricultural, and mechanical pursuits. So she really wanted to help women figure out how they could do this on their own. Then the book was revamped a little and came out later and was known as The Employments of Women, Encyclopedia of Women's Work. And I wanted to quote just a little portion from her book here because I thought it was really meaningful. She said, "I desire to present to those interested a clear and succinct view of the conditions of business in the United States, the openings for entering into business, the vacancies women may fill, and the crowded marks they may avoid, the qualifications needed for a selected pursuit, and the pursuits to which they are best adapted. Also, the probable result pecuniarily of each calling honorably pursued. In short, it is intended as a business manual for women." In May 1867, Penny attended the second convention of the Equal Rights Association, where she was elected as the Kentucky representative among the vice presidents, and then she joined a global network of activists working for women's suffrage as well as equal rights for all. She participated in union activities, including the Working Women's Association in New York, and led protests for women's wages and living conditions. She continued to work throughout her life to further women's equality, both with voting and with the economy. So I hope that you guys continue to do your own research about different men and women who were so active in helping to ensure, and all the people who still help to ensure, that there's equality for all and that everyone has a chance to be the best person they can and to help our society. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Paige Barhorst. I work at Fugate Law Office here in Winchester. I've been an attorney for a couple of years now. I'm going to go over a couple scenarios, a couple questions of rights to vote, and then ways that that right can be limited and ways that it can't be limited. So, if you'll just bear with me, assume the United States Congress passed the following law. The right to vote shall not be denied. The report accompanying the legislation explains that Congress wanted to encourage the greatest amount of voter turnout and to eliminate discrimination on the basis of race and gender, since blacks and women had been denied the right to vote in the past. Moreover, the right to vote is a fundamental principle in our democratic form of government. So, scenario number one, a state requires a person to be at least 21 years old to vote. Sandy Kent is 20 years old and is told she cannot vote. So, do you think that that is allowed or not allowed? The 26th Amendment to the United States Constitution, adopted in 1971, guarantees the right to vote to citizens who are 18 years and older. So this limitation would be struck down. Okay, second scenario. A city charges a $5 poll tax on all persons of voting age. Those who do not pay the tax cannot vote. The tax money is used to improve the school system in the city. Steve Eller does not pay the $5 and is not allowed to vote. So what do we think about that scenario? The U.S. Supreme Court has actually already heard this issue in Harper v. Virginia State Board of Elections. They struck down a similar poll tax as a violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The court said, in that case, voter qualifications have no relation to wealth, nor to paying or not paying this or any other tax. The 24th Amendment abolished poll taxes in all federal elections. So once again, this limitation would not hold up. The third scenario, a state passes a law that denies convicted felons the right to vote until 5 years after completion of their full sentences. Anita Jackson, serving a 10-year sentence for committing a felony, is told she cannot vote. So this case is based on Richardson versus Ramirez, in which the Supreme Court held that the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment does not prohibit a state from disenfranchising convicted felons who had completed their sentence and paroles. The court relied heavily on Section 2 of the 14th Amendment, which allows for the abridgment of the franchise for participation in rebellion or other crime. The fourth scenario, a state requires everyone who registers to vote to pass a literacy test. More difficult tests are given to blacks than to whites. 55% of the blacks fail the test, while only 10% of the whites fail. David Anderson, an African American man who failed the test, is not allowed to vote. Would that be allowed? The Voting Rights Act of 1965, as amended in the 1970, 75, and 82, bans literacy tests as a requirement of voting. The Supreme Court in South Carolina versus Kattensbach upheld the constitutionality of this provision of the Voting Rights Act. And fifth, our final scenario, a state requires a person to be a resident for at least a year before he or she can vote. Dana Brown has been a resident for 6 months and is not allowed to vote. Would that be allowed? The Supreme Court in Dunn versus Bloomstein struck down a Tennessee law similar to this example. The court said that residency requirements were not valid unless the state can demonstrate that such laws are necessary to promote a compelling government interest. So from those 5 scenarios, I think we can all gauge that there's not a lot of limitations that are legal as far as the right to vote goes.
I'd like to thank everybody for watching the video about Law Day 2020. Appreciate all the volunteers that have participated, and then also the teachers and the students that will be watching this. Just an interesting connection between the 19th Amendment and events that are going on today. There are some out there that theorize that the 19th Amendment would not have been passed when it was actually passed if it was not for 2 events. World War I, which resulted in the death of a lot of men, and then also the pandemic, the Spanish flu, that also resulted in a disproportionate number of male deaths. There were more men that died from the Spanish flu than women in the United States. And so those 2 events kind of depopulated, to a certain extent, the United States of America, and it kind of made everybody realize, you know, we need women to be more actively involved in affairs, and maybe this 19th Amendment and women voting is not such a bad thing after all. Kind of an interesting tie-in with what we're going through right now. We appreciate everybody watching. I hope you learned a little bit about Law Day and the 19th Amendment on this 100th anniversary. We have a companion video about what lawyers do and some of the reasons why some of the local attorneys became lawyers. That's also out there as well. Please watch that. We refer you to that video as well. Once again, on behalf of the Clark County Bar Association, thank you for your time.